Today is May the 11th, 2009.
Yes.
My name is Tanya Finchum. And I'm with Oklahoma State University Library, and we're doing an oral history project focusing on Centennial Farms.
Oh, that's interesting. And this other one is just to not let the people's history go by, for Tulsa has.
Right. And today I'm in Davenport with Hortense Royer Ninness.
And really, I'm from Stroud. He's from Davenport, and we're southeast of Stroud, so this has always been route to Stroud.
Okay.
And he's from Davenport, but I'm just in between southeast and southwest.
Well, thank you for having us today.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate doing this.
Well, let's get started with telling us when you were born and where.
I was born in that house over there that burned down in 2002. And that boy was born there too. The only one of my kids there was. But all of us children were born there. My grandfather came here and homesteaded, and so they lived in that house. And he married Mama when he was 18, and so we've all been born there. And then we're buried at the Stroud Cemetery.
And when were you born?
July the 23rd, 1912. And I got the oldest person present at Davenport yesterday, Nettie Davenport Day, Saturday.
Well, that's cool.
Little gold statue. I've got a whole string of them up there that my husband and I would get the longest married person, and he'd get the oldest person for several years. But I didn't take him when he was 100 because he didn't feel too good. I wouldn't make him sit in the car all day.
Well, what can you tell us about the time when your parents came to this area?
Mom and her family were from Rolla, Missouri, and she came with her family when she was, maybe 8 or 9 or something. Her baby sister was born at about 4 miles straight north of here on the Fishburne farms. And she was born at Rolla, Missouri. And then her father was a cowboy through Texas all his young life, and he loved Texas, and he went back and married her, and then he raised his family and stuff, and he kept wanting to go to Texas all the time. And finally she gave in and to leave Missouri and go to Texas with him. I'm sure it was down about the Rio Grande where it's beautiful, But she said Mama told me this, the further west she got out of Missouri into Oklahoma, more desolate the country became. No trees, nothing green, no pretty water running across the rocks and clear and stuff. And she was so disappointed, and she had an older sister that married a Galloway at Stroud, and she said, and they lived at Stroud. So she said, I'm going as far as Stroud, and I'm not going a step further. So we're still here. And then my daddy's daddy was my father was born at Winfield, Kansas. It's close to Newton. And his daddy was sent here by the United States government to put out fruit trees for the Indian. This house over here was built by the government for the chief when this was Indian territory, when they moved the Indians to the Sac and Fox. So I guess my grandfather must have been a horticulturist or something, because he sure knew a lot about fruit trees and things. And he must have put his application in ad or something. And I don't know just how he got here, but that's how he came. The government sent him here, and they put the fruit trees out. This whole southwest corner was fruit trees. And when I was little, there was one tree left. It came clear up close. The road and fence was right. And there was a tree just on the other side of this shed. And it was an apricot tree. And we had a storm one time, blew it over to the south. And my sister and I could climb up it and get the apricots off of it. That's the last tree I remember. But when the chief, they built this home for him. And I had his family come by, the children's family come by one time, and they did not know whether the boys was born to the first wife or second wife. But I was thinking the other day, all they have to do is find out when she died, and when the kids was born, they'd soon know whether it be a white woman or an Indian woman. When his wife died here, he went back to Sac and Fox, and opened him up a store, mercantile, I guess, because that's what every store had in those days. And when my grandfather got the fruit trees put out, then he took a job with his team and wagons, and it's called a dray wagon, and they go to Guthrie and haul supplies back to the Sac and Fox. It took about a week for him to make that trip. Well, after this Indian woman died, the house was sitting empty. Nobody lived in it. You know, Indians always burn their teepee and everything, and they move when anyone dies in to keep diseases down. They're smarter than we are. Anyway, he went down there and his house sat empty. Well, by then my grandfather was sort of sitting empty, and he just rented whatever was around this part of the world. Now, I don't know when the Frisco Railroad went through, but the oldest boy was 20 years older than my daddy, and he was the foreman on this train that went from Stroud through to Davenport and Chandler. So if you could know what year that was, his second brother died because they stopped that handcar at the road, and he fell over and broke his neck. And this little town over here, 2 miles west and 3 south, was called Clematis, and I did not know it was a town all my life until Don Sporleader had a tour here a while back on it and took us over there, and they told us about it. Because my grandmother always said is buried over Clematis Cemetery. And I always thought it was just Clematis Cemetery. I didn't think about a town being called Clematis. But originally the town was called Clematis, and they call the cemetery Victor now. And Don explained to us that day that a man came from Victor, Kansas down, and he had a homestead over there, or bought a farm or house or something, at the town of Clematis, and his little daughter died. And he renamed the cemetery Victor, after where they came from Kansas, I guess where she was born or something. So that's why it's called Victor instead of Clematis. And so my grandfather then took a job during the trees and things all set out and things, so he wanted to drive a dray wagon from Guthrie to the Sac and Fox and getting supplies. And so in between the time that this boy died and then, this house was sitting empty. So my grandfather told the Indian man, said, if you aren't going to live in that house, why don't you let me move my family in there? So he said, you can have it. You can have the house and all the land around it. So he gave it to him, and I don't know how many years from the time his wife died till my grandfather moved in there. But my daddy was 9 when his father died. So it's sometime between the time he was born and then, 9 years, that the wife died and they moved in there. Because when the boy put the railroad through, Daddy showed me over west of Davenport, down in the hollow, about a half a mile. You go downhill from the Davenport Cemetery. That's where the Frisco Railroad had houses that they let their employees live in. Daddy said there was 3 on the north side of the railroad track. And it's in the area where Tipton's owned land on the north side of the 66. And this was on the south side, between the 66 and the railroad track. And they lived there, Daddy told me, and he went to school when Davenport School was up where the cemetery is. That was the first school Davenport had, way back yonder. And so Grandpa moved his family into this house, so he'd been here all these years. And then when Daddy was 9, his father had went to Guthrie and got a load of supplies and they brought everything in barrels and stuff, then, and took them to the Sac and Fox. And by the way, I can remember when my sister and I would lay upstairs in the bed, and Grandma Royer had big square, they was at least this big, of wallpaper patterns, and he'd bring wallpaper books from Guthrie down. And and I did work for a lady in Stroud that her daddy had built the houses for the people in the Sac and Fox, individual homes, and they'd wallpaper their houses. Well, wallpaper companies change the book every year, and he'd give them to Grandma, and she wallpapered the ceiling in the brick house, and we'd lay there and pick out the one we liked the best. I had a blue one that I liked. And so he brought all them supplies down, and he'd gone to Guthrie, and got a load of supplies. He ate his breakfast and left to come back. It took about a week, I think, for him to get here from back and forth for the trip from Guthrie back. And the days then you went across country. You didn't have no section lines or roads. It was just out across the country. And they went around through the hills over here by Homesteaders was, God, I can't think of his name now. Betty Waters' daddy, Archie Oliver's farm, where they homesteaded the foothills and between the river. And they went on toward Devonport and on across country. And so he left Guthrie, started back with his supplies that morning, and he said he got about halfway home when he began to get sick. And so he thought, well, it's as close to the Sacking Fox to a doctor as it would be to go back to Guthrie to a doctor. And so he said, I'll just go on and empty my supplies, then go back home. And Mama told me that in 3 days he was dead. And they never did know what killed him. But over the years, Mama had learned that about ptomaine poisoning, and so she decided that's why he died, because he ate before he left and he got sick all the way. So she said it must have been ptomaine poisoning that he died. So he's buried over there. He'd be the second one in the Clematis Cemetery. And then I was 13 when my grandmother died. She lived and had rheumatism a lot worse than I do. Rheumatism, that's what they called it in those days. My neighbor Laura says, Hortense, there's no such a thing as rheumatism, but you know what I'm talking about. And so we have inherited a little bit of it down through the family. But she was pitiful. It was terrible. And she sat in a chair, and Mama would lift her in and out of the bed and all that stuff till she died. And I can remember, it was my responsibility to take care of Grandma when my sister's 2 years younger than I. And if we was out in the yard playing, Mama would be in the garden making the peas and all that garden stuff, you know, pulling weeds and things. And my job was to take care of Grandma. If she called and wanted a drink of water and I didn't go in and give it to her, I got a spanking when she come in and Grandma told her I didn't. She called and called and called. I didn't come. So I was so attached to her, I guess, and I can remember standing in the front door, and the women was all around Grandma on the corner of the bed over there. And by the way, that bed is part of it out there. It got the other half stolen. But Mama told me that her father gave that to her for a wedding present. And Preacher Howard told me that in those days they gave the family a team of mules and a bedstead. And that was the wedding presents to help them start married life together. So that bed was still in Mama's house, and that's the one he was born on too. And they were all around Grandma, and I heard somebody say she had died. And God, I guess it shocked me so that they said I went out that front door like a bullet, and I ran down the road, and I ran a half a mile to where my daddy was. There was an oil well being drilled down on Grandpa Hopper's farm. And Mama and them said, there ain't no way catching that girl, she's gone. And I can remember running that far and them talking about that, you know, and Grandma died. Anyway, and then here it says something about a log barn and that log building, the barn, telling about the barn. Mm-hmm. And I did not remember, I played in a million times, but I did not remember as I grew up and left here about it being a log barn until there was a preacher from the Methodist Church in Chandler that he studied the 5 civilized tribes, and he'd write to Washington, D.C. and get maps and patterns and everything about the history. And he came over here with a map that had my brick house on it and another house. He said there's 2 houses here in 1860, and that was what his map was. And I said, I can't remember a building down there. And then we talked about it, and later on I finally remembered that was a log barn. And my reason why I couldn't remember it was a barn, because we grew up calling it a corn crib. Because Daddy had put tin all the way around the barn, and when the corn crop came in, he'd put the corn in there for the horses and stuff. And then he built his barn on further south with the comb that goes up high and then down. And in the middle of it there, he had 3 big gold poles out of trees in the woods. And would put a wooden stanchion thing and feed box for the horses. And they were tied up just south of the log barn. And then on the other side of it, he kept hay stored, and we kept a cow on that side. So I can remember that's what the log barn looked like when I was growing up, after I was a young kid. And my sister and I, we'd all climb up on that tin barn and run down and jump off on the ground. All the kids played around the barn, the buildings, climbed on all of them. And later, I have a friend that her daddy lived 10 miles south of Davenport Cemetery. And one day I was going down there to visit, and I'm always driving around on a road somewhere just to see what the country looks like my daddy always did. And I drove about 4 or 5 miles south of the Davenport Cemetery, and then I went a couple of miles west, and there's a log barn standing just exactly like it. And the house, I thought, I took pictures of it and things, but I don't know if it's still there now or not, because that hadn't been too many years ago, so it may still be standing. And I don't know whether it would be a barn or a house, because they built 2 rooms and then had a walkway between the 2. And the door to the barn was on the inside under the roof, you know, where you opened up and put your harness and stuff in it from the horses. Because I can remember that much of it, of how the log barn was built. I don't remember what some of these other things were. Farmhouse. How it changed over the years. Well, they built this, and I was a kid growing up, and I liked flowers. And I was at the south end of the house, and I was digging flowers out to make a flower bed, dirt and stuff. And I dug. Mama said, "Quit digging them rocks out of there. You'll make the house fall down. That's the foundation of the house." And Romeyn one time took a trip in high school down to eastern Oklahoma, and he came back telling about a house an old man had started down there, and it was partly built. I guess he died and moved on away. And the houses were built with a rock foundation, and it was wide at the bottom, and they came up at an angle to meet the what you put the house on. And this brick house was built like that. And it was 4 rooms, 2 down and 2 up, and they were at least 16 feet wide or wider. I had it one time, I knew, but I don't anymore. I wrote it in the Historical Society at Chandler's got it at one time. And in between the north room and the south room was a big hallway. And those steps, 16 steps up. I remember them as well as I count them every day and every night. And they was made out of, Daddy said, see, these are made, weren't sanded or planed off. You saw the circle of the saw where it sawed out the boards that they was made out of. But we'd walked on them and polished them so many times they shined like a piece of varnished furniture. And then upstairs was not full story high. It went up about 6 feet on each side and then the roof. So that's how Mama called it, a story and a half, but it'd be built, it looked like a 2-story building, and there was 4 windows in the south end and 4 in the north end, and 2 on each side in the east end, and none on the west end except downstairs. They didn't put them upstairs, windows on the west upstairs, but they had them downstairs, 2 on the west. And then at the hallway part, above each doorway of it upstairs was there was not one on the window on the west, but there was on the east. A window upstairs, a half window that went from the roof down to the floor area. And our windows was made in, I'd like to have, y'all might help me on this. I've been reading that the Indians have built a museum in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking, there's too much beautiful stuff over here to go to waste. And I'd love to see, and I've been planning on writing the governor or somebody about it, to take those bricks. They're made out of sand, and they do break, so you have to handle them carefully, but there's a lot of whole bricks still over there, and a lot of them broke as they fell. But they would make beautiful benches or seats or a wall around the building or something. And then the windows, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 at least windows. No, 9, 10, 11, nearly 12 windows. that were made with a rock ledge, a hand-hewn rock ledge, about 12 or 14 inches wide and the full length of the window. And those were big windows in those days. They weren't the size that these are. And that rock was put on top of the foundation of the house. When they laid the brick up so high, then they put this. It's at least 6 or 8 inches thick, and it's at least 3 or 4 feet long. And it's about a foot or more wide. And then they put a wooden wall. That house had all solid walnut in it, too. Every board and stair step and everything's made out of solid walnut. The 2x6s that the stairway was built out of was all solid walnut. And so there's a walnut board laid on top of that rock window ledge. And they're still over there. And I'd like to see somebody, they could lay them on top of the seats, make beautiful seats around that Indian. And it is the Sac and Fox stuff. So that would help on the Indian Museum. And I'd love to see, so maybe you talk to somebody, maybe you can get them, tell them about it, maybe you can get them to come out here.
We'll see what we can do.
Save the brick and stuff, because I hate to bulldoze it off and see it carried out and put in a ditch somewhere, and that'd be the end of it. And I think you got the lay of the land or something in here, and I kind of wanted to tell you about what I can remember. And my sister has the picture of my father and mother, and I've been telling her when she finds it, send it back to me. My daddy had bought a Kodak picture, a Kodak to take, they're big old foot square cameras with glass plates that went in them to take pictures, and he had one of those. So I guess that's what he took it with. And when they married and lived here, there was a lot of ditches in the farm because it was farmed with cotton and stuff like that in those days. And then you followed you went up and down. You made a straight row. You didn't make crooked rows. It had to be perfect. You'd stand on one end and see clear at the other end of the field with a straight row. That was being a proud farmer. And so evidently over the years the water had washed, and maybe natural. I know it was natural because a lot of it was because Daddy told about the people that live south, wagons and teams. It's hard for them to go up a hill and everything. And he said this corner up here is at least 16 feet of dirt on top of it was that much lower when he was a kid growing up. And there was filling stations, not filling stations, but grocery stores and buildings at that corner. And one time, I guess it was a grocery store at that corner on that side. And he said that was at least 16 feet lower. There's that much dirt washed in there. And so this hill up here would have washed down, so it would have been higher. And all this, so my daddy opened the gate down here, and he let the farmers that lived south, everybody, they came right through this farm and went up through the fence row of the farm, and went back west a little ways, and then straight north and come out on top of the hill. So the team could pull the wagon easier than going down this hill and up that hill there. So that's the way the land was. And then in front of the house going down, just about maybe, how far would it be to that first pecan tree, Romeyn, from the mailbox up? Quick as you go down my driveway, now I got a mailbox, well then when you start north, that's where the ditch is, and big pecan trees there. And this ice storm we had in 2002 took a huge pecan tree down, and I guess its roots was on the rocks, the reason why it didn't stay up too good. But we lost 2 down there in that ice storm. They were old trees, I'm sure. But Daddy and Mama hauled rock. They went down a half a mile and then 2 miles west. Mama said a mile across there the way the crow flies. And she grew up with that girl. And she married a man, and that was his home over there. And they haul rock from that hill. That's a real rock hill. That's where the deer farm is now, Davenport's deer farm. And it's a solid rock hill. All that over there's rock. And so they hauled rock from there and filled this ditch up down here, wrapped them across from one area to the other. And then they took a picture of them standing in front of it, and they held their hands up and it didn't even touch the top of the rock. Now that's how deep that ditch was that they hauled rock and put in there. So that's the way the land. And my uncle, Daddy's oldest brother, he went on west. And he ended up in Oregon, and he came back one time and visited as an old man. And he told me that north of this house was solid timber. They had cleared all that off. And then, of course, Don Spoileater said over at Creek County line that there wasn't any trees at all, and now they're all solid cedars over there. But he said in those days it was prairie and there wasn't any trees anywhere around. But Uncle Lou told me they had to clear all that, and I imagine they cleared this for the fruit orchard too. And I got to tell you a cute little story. The Indians would camp around here all the time. They brought their teepees when I was a kid growing up, and they'd camp. Daddy always let them camp wherever they wanted to. And he told me a story about, this is solid willows back here from the river around, and he said the Indian chief would send the big bucks down here, and they would go down and cut the willow trees and strip the bark, and that's what they made their teepees out of when they had their powwow down at Sac Fox when he was a kid. And Grandma told me then one time that, and the women would come up here when their baby was going to be born, and they'd camp all around, and said there was a little young girl had her baby, and she jumped up and took off down to the creek to take a bath, and Grandma said, "Don't do that, you'll kill yourself, you'll take pneumonia." She would go take a bath after she gave birth to a baby. That's what custom they did, I guess, would take a bath and clean up and stuff, and just a hopping to jump down there at the river. And Daddy's mother brought her loom with her from Kansas when she came weaving rugs. And Mama said she had it set up in the north room upstairs, and said she could had a loom that big enough to almost cover the whole floor. That's how big a carpet she could weave. And she put out a black walnut tree down there at the edge of the fence row between our land and the neighbors. And it's still standing there, a black walnut tree. And she did that to get brown dye for her dye to her rags. And I took Daddy up to Pawnee one time. I've been up there twice to the museum, and I took him one trip, and he went around looking through there, and he found a bucket and a crank on it, and he said, "Boy, I've stomped a many a rag in a bucket like that for my mother, and twisted that handle and twisted the rags for her to put through her loom to weave her carpets with." And then she told me she would save onion skins, make the yellow dye. That in the blue flower, it's called indigo flower. They'd got the blue, I guess, out of. Those are about the only things I remember about her, telling about her dyeing. But then one year she decided she wanted to go to California, or out west. It was Cheyenne, Wyoming then. That where her oldest son was, and she was homesick for them. So one year we all went out there and stayed, I think, 2 years. And then came back, and then he went on. He ended up in Oregon, and he liked to mine. He would dig mines and sold uranium to the government during World War II out of his mine. Then Daddy and Mama separated, and they went out. Daddy went out there. They went to California during the Depression because nobody had a job here, and you couldn't make any money or anything. And that's when and they said, "Why did you get married in 1930? I said, "Well, I was in love. Didn't matter to me, the Depression was on." But we lived married life. First married life was through the Depression. It wasn't really good. And now we've got one that's really, I think, is worse than the one we had then. But then we had dust blowing during that time. We had the dust bowl because they farmed their fields up north, just straight rows and plowed. And they cut all the trees down. The wind came and it blew and made. The day my brother's oldest girl died, we drove from Asher up here in a dust storm. You couldn't hardly see the highway. That dust storm was so bad. And then it was Highway 18 going to Shawnee. It was dirt road. There wasn't no gravel or pavement on it when that happened. Long time ago stuff.
So when you got married, you lived here on this land?
Yeah, we got, my husband's from Illinois. And I went with his cousin, lived 2 miles north of here. All his family had died, and he was the only one left. So he decided he wanted to go back to Illinois to meet his mother's people. And now my husband was born here at Stroud, 101 years soon ago. But And Stroud, I don't imagine, was only down at the railroad track, just a little bitty place. My daddy couldn't remember moving the buildings from Old Stroud down to the Stroud because the railroad come through and put it on the low level part. So the man that homesteaded that acreage, he made a town out of it, and it's called Stroud after him. And so they moved all the houses and buildings down to this low level, down to the railroad track and the depot. And Daddy was... now, I don't know if his daddy was dead then or not, but I know he was like 8 or 9 or somewhere after 5 years old anyway. And he said they put logs underneath the buildings and then would roll them, and then that log that come out from behind, they took it and put it in front and rolled it again. And that's the way they moved the buildings from up on the hill down to the valley. And so I know Stroud couldn't have been over a block or two wide. And my husband was born, which would be about a mile north of Stroud. Now Stroud's past it. And it was called Little River. No, I'm sorry. Little River's down Seminole.
Salt Creek?
It was called Salt Creek at Stroud. And it's right at the edge of town, right out by Tanger Mall now. In the south. And then Stroud goes clear up the golf course and further north, now. So... but his family came out here because this boy I went with, a Chapman boy, his mother and Clarence's mother were sisters. And so he ran a jewelry store and a saloon in Stroud. And he had bought this farm or got a hold of it from somebody, pioneers that went on west, I guess. And so he needed somebody to farm, take care of his farm, so he had Clarence's mama, his wife's sister, to come out here, her family, and run the farm. So that's how come he was born in Oklahoma. So they stayed here several years till, about 3 kids were born here, I guess. And his brother lived in Shawnee. His niece is a nurse in Dallas, Texas now, and she didn't know anything about her daddy, so I'm going to take her one of these days. His mother came out and visited us a while, his mother and dad and them. And when we went from here to Davenport, well, she showed me, she said O.D. was born 1 mile east of Davenport. And so I have been in, and it's a log house. And we visited one of Clarence's cousins back in Illinois after he'd spent 20 years in service and retired, and we'd never seen him, but we went and visited his mother, his daddy, and his brother all the time. So when this kid came back, Marion, Illinois is real close to Carmike, where his daddy and them settled. And so I said, let's go down and visit him. And his daddy had just died, and he had a whole box full of pictures. And he said, take all them with you back to Oklahoma if you want to. I don't know a soul in them boxes. And I wish now we'd brought them all, because my husband knew a lot of them. And I did too, because I'd been married to the family so long. And so he picked out a lot of pictures and brought them home that day. And there was a house, a log house, and his mother and daddy was standing in front of it. And he's about 5 years old. And the little boy that was born that lived here was about 18 months or something. He was playing in the dirt. And Clarence could never remember that log house. But since his mother was here and told me that's where he's born, and I drove down, I'm always prowling around to see what's in the country, and I drove down that road one day and went in there, and there was that log house. They had a new frame house on the hill a little west of it, but that's the house. That's where that picture was made. But when we wrote everything on the back of it, he thought it was somewhere in Illinois where they'd sharecropped or somewhere. He couldn't remember where it was. But I do know now, and that log house is still standing over there. They have tin around it and stuff, but it's still there, a little old 2-room thing, just like all of them were built, I guess. And so this cousin of his that lived north here decided he'd go back to Illinois to visit his mother's family. And so my husband was working up north. He always farmed, sharecrop farming or worked for a farmer. His parents, those days, the kids all had to help make a living. And they put little kids out with uncles and aunts or somebody to help make the living. And so she had a brother that lived at North City where she was born and raised. And Clarence went over there when he said he was 5 years old. He started taking care of working for Uncle Irvin. And so then from there on, he went on north to Illinois as he grew up working on farms, and he ended up in Tanya, Illinois. And that's who I named him after, Romeyn Ford, and that he worked for. I had a time of naming him. Nobody, every name I called, nobody liked. I don't like that. I don't like that. One day I remembered about Romeyn Ford, and I said, next morning I woke up, I said, I've got his name, and nobody's going to change it. His name is Romeyn. Oh, I like that. I like that. That's pretty. So that's where his name comes from. And it was Christmas time. So Clarence came from Ford's back down to Carmi for Christmas to be with his folks. And this boy was out there visiting his mother's people. And Seminole was just booming. Oil field days, Tulsa, and then Drumlight, and then Cushing, and all around Bowlegs. Bowlegs, Seminole, Bowley. And all them was boom towns. And Seminole was just starting. So his cousin said, why don't you go back to Oklahoma with me? You can get a good job in the oil fields. They just said, you can get a job. So he decided he'd come to Oklahoma with him. And he lived up here on the farm. And now 66, the original 66, was on the OOHRP Trail. And it came a mile west of Stroud, a mile south of Stroud, a mile west of Stroud, and then a mile south. And that's that marker that's up there, that white marker. If y'all go north from here, you'll see it. And then it went west to come out at Sowards, where 66 is now. And I was in high school when they cut it across. And so we came to, his cousin had a farm right there 1 mile, half a mile north of that pyramid. So in those days, you had to have a filling station every place on a corner because people traveling, going to California and stuff. So his cousin put a filling station on the corner where it came south and then went west. And that pyramid, I can't remember when that was built, but I can remember, I must have been between 13 and somewhere in that age, I guess, or maybe 14 or 15. When Rural Electric from Stillwater was going to put it, rural electric all through the farmers, and he came out here, and my daddy paid $35 for this farm to have electricity. Now, I wasn't married. I was still a little kid at home. And they never did get electricity. It seems like something happened to the money, and it never was built. And it was, about 4 or 5 years, Romeyn, after we came back here before we got electricity.
It's 51.
1951. Well, we had water from the well and windmill and all that kind of stuff for the house. Daddy even put that tank right out there was full of water, and we had it running to the house. We had water in the house when people in town and everything. But as I grew up, I thought, when I get married, I'm going to live in town. I don't want to live in the country where you have to carry water and all that junk. But by the time I came back here, I didn't mind living on the farm because we had electricity not long after we was here, so I didn't mind that. But Clarence came out here, and that filling station on the corner then was the original 66 highway. And I can remember when they built that white monument up there, and up at the top, if you notice, there's a square hole on each side, and they was going to put electric light to shine down, and they painted how many miles it was to town, and the arrow telling you which way to go. This was the highway. 49 when I was a kid growing up, and it went right on south to Seminole. And so it came the original 66 highway and went on down to Seminole. And the bridge that's 3 miles south of here over Deep Fork, you can't even find it. It's underwater now. That we went across in those days. And Couture Brown's got pictures of her kids on that bridge, but she said there's nothing there now. You can't even see it. Now that's how much dirt's washed in and the water's filled in and how much the earth is. The Bible says the high places be made low and the low places be made high. So they really are, if you just know the history of any place, you know. And so this that pyramid was put there, and this filling station on the corner. And then the road would tell you, and I can only remember one on the west part. I can remember Tulsa 60 miles and Oklahoma City 60 miles. And the arrow pointed when you came from the west, that way for Tulsa. And then the other way from Seminole and coming to Tulsa going to Oklahoma City went that way. And the arrow said 60 miles. There's only two I can remember. But there was one out at where the Oklahoma border line is, you know. I can't remember the name. I've been trying to think of the last 2 or 3 days. It had that knowledge, and I can kind of remember it, how far it was from here to end of Oklahoma, and then Los Angeles. Everybody was headed to Los Angeles. So all those names was on. And then Seminole as you went this way, pointed straight on the way or to the right. And so this cousin came out, and of course I was going to high school then. Oh, by the way, the school was a half a mile south of me. And back in when I was about maybe 15 or something, my brother and my sister's 2 years younger than I am. And then my brother's 11 months older than I am. And I can remember they closed the county, the school superintendent and stuff. They wouldn't pay for teachers anymore because all the farm people, sharecroppers, had moved away and there wasn't enough children in a country school. They began to close them down. And so my school was closed down early, one among the first ones, I guess. And we had to go to Stroud to school, and the grade school, to finish school. And I think I started in the 7th grade, and then I had the 8th grade. I graduated, then you graduated out of 8th, and then they had a junior high for a while. You graduated from it, and then senior. But they changed that junior high after a while. And my daddy bought us a Ford Coupe. That Ford was a real popular car in those days. Nice to drive, and we'd travel on muddy roads and all that junk. And I took about 5 kids in my car. I was the driver, and we went to Stroud School. And that's where we graduated from for the 8th grade, because this was closed out. But there's a new building down there that was built during the Depression when Roosevelt, I was 18, I remember that, I voted for Roosevelt. And by the way, every president I've voted for since has been the president. I'm not proud of 2 of them, but that's what happened. My grandson, he ate me out because I voted for this one, so on there now. I said, he's going to be the president. First time I heard him speak, I said, he'll be the president, and I'm voting for him. I don't know why I know, but I do, and I voted for Roosevelt, and I was 18. And that school was built during that time. It was Depression time, still on. And the farmers built this road that goes to Davenport. It's called the Farm to Market Road, 910 now. And that was built by the farmers, so the farmers could have a good road to go to town, shopping, get their groceries and stuff. And then that school was built during that time. The old school was a wooden building closer to the road, and they put this one back a little farther, and it's rock, but it burned a few years ago. People were living in it that we sold that farm to, and they lived in it. And I told him, I said, the chimney is made for you up. Stovepipe goes up the top and the chimney goes in there, but he stuck it in the bottom where you clean the ashes out, and I said, that's not right. But anyhow, it burned up. I don't know whether that's what did it or not, but anyway, it burned. But the rock building is still standing. And I remember the south end of the building, Daddy and them had a big diamond rock put in there, and they had me to draw Roosevelt's picture and put on there, and they chiseled it out in there, and it's still up there.
The WPA building?
WPA building. And all this work was WPA road work and everything to keep the men, give them a job. So, and I was married part of that time. See, I married during the Depression, so we had got laid off from oil fields. When I married him, we went to oil fields and went to work. He got that job in the oil fields, and he stayed with his cousin. Of course, he's quick as his cousin introduced me to him down there at the filling station. He told his cousin, I'm going to marry that girl. Took him a year and a half.
A car.
Took him a year and a half to talk me into it, but anyway, he'd come back and stay at his cousin's house and then asked me for a date. We done that about a year and a half before we got married. And got married during the 30s, during the Depression. And then he worked in oil fields all that time, and these kids was all born there and everything. And the oldest boy born at Seminole, and this when I came home to Mom and them. And then we got laid off. The Depression got so bad that companies began to lay off their workers. And so he was laid off, and we came back here to the farm and lived. And and sharecropped him on the farm. My daddy always had 2 sharecroppers. There was one lived straight west here, and then one up in the house in the field that helped take care of the farm. And Daddy would take produce from the farm and peddle it to all the oil field towns. He bought a big truck with a flatbed on it, put sideboards on it, and he hauled watermelons, green beans, corn. Didn't have frozen trucks then that brought frozen fresh vegetables from anywhere. He peddled them to, and peddle apples. He said you'd always have to go around and knock on the door, and they didn't answer. He'd go around back, the woman would be outside washing in the washing machine, and boil kettle boiling their clothes, and she'd always buy a bushel or 2 bushel and can of apples, you know. And that's the way he helped make a living. And, of course, we lived up here then until he was born. He was born in 34, and we had just gone back to, kind of began to pick up. Then oil company said, if we ever go back to work, we'll call you. So we moved to Asher, and we lived at Asher when he was born, and I was doctoring up here, so I came back up here. But anyway, his cousin lived at that farm, filling station. They'd meet us every night down there, us girls, you know. Oh, I remember one time I had about 4 girls in there with. We only had one boy that rode, and the rest was all girls, and my sister and I and the other girls. And one of them dared me to wait at Clarence when he come out on his cousin porch. He grabbed the broom, come out and sweep it every morning before we went by, you know, knowing we was coming by to go to school. I said, I ain't afraid to wave at him, so I waved at him. And the girls teased me because from then on, then, of course, I didn't care who I flirted with. It didn't matter to me. I had a lot of good fun times. We had a lot of boys before I ever met him. I had company. We had farm people then. They usually had 2 or 3 boys in the family and everything. And so if they wanted to go somewhere, we had pie suppers at the country schools. And we took boxes and decorated them with crepe paper. You could buy crepe paper then by the package in the dime stores. And you gather them on the machine, make ruffles or pleats or something, and roses. Miss Howell over there, 1 mile east of us, she could make the prettiest roses I ever laid eyes on. And she dipped them in paraffin, and they looked just like real roses. Ooh, that's pretty. We'd decorate those pie boxes and take pies, and that's the way they made their money to buy Christmas gifts and candies and stuff for the children, school children at Christmas time. And all the schools around here had pie suppers. And then, of course, my husband, he had to buy my pie, of course, over when we went there. And he liked banana cream pie, and Mama would make that. And had pure cow cream you could beat then and make whipping cream. Good stuff to eat. Now you buy old junk out of the store with a bunch of junk that's put in it where it don't even taste like cow cream. I don't know what some of these other things were.
You're doing fine.
Typical day raising. And of course I can remember one time we had a cow that Mama's mother left her. They lived over here on this first farm, joined our farm on the west. And I think Mr. Murphy had homesteaded up around Kendrick because that's where his daughter stayed and taught school till she died. And he would buy, evidently, farms up, and he had bought this one next to us. And her mother and father, he'd rented out to sharecroppers, and her daddy was sharecropper. And they was living in that house, and Mama said when they married, they'd go over walk over to the back side. Now, my brother can remember when buffaloes had a waller up on his 80 acres, north side of this. But I can't remember much about that except them talking, but he knew right where the waller was.
There's one right down here in this willow patch, too.
And then she said that was called an old pond, and there's springs where that buffalo water on his part of the farm. And the water came down and came down on this way, and of course that was lots of water. And Mama said they kept a boat tied up over there, and they'd walk over to that old pond, and then boat across to Murphy's side, and then they'd get out and walk up and visit her mom and daddy and them, and then they'd come back and take the boat and come back home. But the water don't stand like that anymore. But when we have a big overflow, it goes up there. And Daddy had made 2 different ditches for that water to drain down out of those springs. It still comes out of the earth up there on the north 80 of this farm. So
So it was originally 160 acres?
Yeah, that's what you homesteaded. Oh, that I'll go back to that, because when my grandfather lived here for years before, then the government decides they're going to take Indian Territory and Creek Nation and divide it up and homestead it for people. They had the Indians all down there, and this Indian's wife had died, and she'd moved down there, and my grandparents was living here. Well, they surveyed and made 160 acres for everybody's farm around, and they came to my grandfather and said he's going to have to run for it. He said, I own this land, it belongs to me, and this house and everything. The chief gave it to me, and he'd been there for years. And they said, we don't care, it's too far from the Indian Agency, and it came in a survey of the 160 acres. So he had to go over to, Grandma told me he went over to Creek County line, and when the gun went off, he ran to Chandler and filed his claim and homesteaded this then. So we're still here. So he homesteaded. And then, of course, he died after that, you know. I don't know the dates of years or anything. And we were too poor to put up tombstones, so I don't have any dates over there, but they have that record, that chart. That a lady in Davenport asked me one time when she was getting old and going to leave, she asked me to take the books, but I didn't think I knew. I don't know, for some reason I didn't do it. And somebody else took them. But they were smart enough to take the records to Chandler and make a file of all the cemetery, you know, stuff. So they do have that. But Marcellus, my brother, he went over when, I can't remember his name, was mowing. He has a job now mowing the cemetery and putting it up. And my brother, you donate money to help pay for the gasoline stuff and mowing and things. And when Don took us around on the trip, there's a new fence put around the cemetery, and I asked him, I said, is this gate in the same place it was a long time ago before they put the new fence up? He said, yes, they put the gate in the same place. I said, well, I can remember exactly going in and where my grandmother's graves are, although there's no stones there. But it's on the record but my brother said they don't have each individual marked. And Grandpa Hopper, this was the highway, so there was a filling station and a grocery store right across from our schoolhouse. And he raised his two grandsons and his granddaughter, and the oldest one kind of liked me. By the way, I still had his little Valentine card he gave me. It burned up my house. Oh, it did a little piece of paper folded up like a book about 2 or 3 inches square. That was my first Valentine, I guess. And because he liked me, and he'd bring candy to me from Grandpa's store. I kind of liked him. Then there was a boy lived over here by Star School, about 2 or 3 miles. The school went ever so far, I don't remember now, Mama told me. But there had to be a school ever so far, and there was one over here named Star. And when you go west on that, it's about maybe 3 miles, about 2.5 miles anyway. And on the south side, there's a lot of iris. They had the yellow iris then. They called them flags. And that school is just, the field is just full of them. That's where the schoolhouse was. And these kids were sharecroppers over there, a boy and a girl. And that was a good-looking boy. Boy, I liked him pretty well. So I had 2 boyfriends, Virgil and, I can't remember that kid's name now. But, and I went to see Virgil after he married and lived in Drumlight one time. I heard he was living up there, so I went up and visited him and his wife and stuff. I asked him how he met his wife. He said he met her over here at Davenport. Of course, I was married in Rome then. I lived away from here all my life in oil fields, down around Asher and Cherry Hill and Pearson Switch and Asher and St. Louis. There was a St. Louis down there, too.
Cherry Switch? I haven't heard that one.
Cherry Hill. Hill is south of St. Louis, and then the oil company had a lease out there. Let's see, when we first married, we went on a lease called Gypsy Oil Company. It was a Gypsy lease, and then that oil company had 2 different names. I forgot what the other one was. Guff Oil Company, and Gypsy was the same. Maybe one bought the other out or something, I don't know. But when we married, it was Gypsy Oil Company, and we lived on the Gypsy lease. And their main office was over by Wewoka. And my husband would stay in a boarding house and had, I got acquainted, the girl that ran the boarding house, she married a man, her second husband, and lived on the same lease we did, so I got well acquainted with her. And she ran the boarding house, and my husband would stay in the boarding house and eat his meals there when he was in the oil fields that week, and then come up here on the weekends. It was the cousins and visited him. Talk about my new bridge down here. I'm so proud of it. It's been changed about 3 times, I think, since I grew up here. And the reason why it washed out this time, stupid county, state, whoever decided you can't burn the trash, it has to be piled up on the bank, and you can't burn logs or trees or anything. I hope they've changed their mind now. They cleaned that river out and piled the biggest stack, big as this house, up on the south side of the bank, and we had a high overflow, and it washed all them logs down to the bridge, and they can't go through, so the water goes around the ends of the bridge and took all the dirt and everything with it, washed the bridge out. So that's what happened to our bridge down there. And then they decide to build new bridges, and so they put this one back in line with the original one that I can remember going across when I was a kid going to school. We walked from here down there all the time to school. And since this was a main highway, and Mama took the Kansas City Star and the Caprice Weekly. That was our main papers then. And in New York, they was kidnapping kids and grabbing them off the road or anything. And she warned us about if a car, since this was the main highway, said if anybody slows down for you all, you hit under the fence and out through the field and get away from them. Don't you talk to anybody or go up to any car. Because that's what was going on then. It's thick everywhere now, and then it was in big cities, kidnapping girls and so on and so forth. And we walked back and forth, and I can remember, by the way, that barn was right down there on the other side of that cedar tree, and the wagons went diagonally across that way and came to the barn, unhitched the horses and things and fed them. Then the road came up right here, and it's real sloping out there. I've had 2 loads of dirt put in that, and then it came all up here, and the road y'all came up is the original road that went down to the mailbox, and the house was put on that side over there. Well, that's at least 6 or 7 or maybe 8 feet deep, that road is. And just a couple of years ago, I let my neighbor bulldoze all the banks off because I got a man that's putting up hay and putting cows in here, and he wanted to make it pretty. He said it'll be level and you can mow the grass and this, that. And I had flowers on the south bank the prettiest year, so I hated to part with that, and I wish now I hadn't. I had wild rose. It was the pink roses over 100 years old that I brought and put down there. And I had lilacs, and I had daylilies and jonquils and all kinds of pretty flags, iris. And of course they all went down there, but I let him do that. But when you all go down that road, you'll see how deep, and that was original, came right up around here by this well and down that way to the barn. And by the way, it says something about blacksmith shops and something in here. And I did not know why that big old cement block right out there, you can see right in front of where you parked your car, it's about 4 feet square on the end, and it's about 6 or 8 feet long. And Mama one day told me that's where my grandfather's blacksmith shop was. And I guess he did his blacksmith, the pounding of iron and stuff, on that cement block. But when I grew up, Daddy had it right here on west of that cedar tree. And that's where it was when we moved back here. And the old barn was still down there that Daddy had. And so my husband decided it was too much manure had been piled up around, and then the barn was lower, and it was staying muddy and wet, so he decided to move it out where it is now, out toward the pond. This says, describe a typical day from rising to going to bed then and now. Well, now we don't do much of anything except sit here on a chair, but my sister and I, that old brick house had 16 steps from the bottom to the top. Count them more times, I know exactly how many there are. And Daddy had told me, I've already described to you what he said is made out of walnut, and their saw marks are still on it, you can see them. But we had a brother, my sister, me, my brother older, and then me, and then my sister. And my brother could tease my sister and make her mad. She'd cry over anything, get so mad, and he teased her all the time, but he couldn't make me. I didn't cry. It didn't bother me for anybody to tease me. So she was always teased all the time. And when we'd go upstairs to bed, when we were in Wyoming, Daddy killed wild animals, and they had a deer or elk, I guess it was, he had mounted and brought back. And then he had I guess it was a bear or colt or something, bear maybe, hide that was a rug, and the head was there. And my brother was always scaring her with that old bear rug if he'd go upstairs. She was scared of her shadow. Where did the material used in the farm's buildings come from? Trees on the farm, stone from the fields, and so forth. Well, there's been quite a bit of argument about where the brick came from that was made, but Mama and they're just as red as this clay is around here. But Mama has finally said it was made at a kiln at the agency, they think. Davenport also had a brick plant, but I don't know what, maybe it was later, because Davenport wasn't even here then. And so my daddy did tell me one time, he said, Hortense, you see these cement these bricks put together with? He said that is slack lime stuff that they went over to Creek County, Creek Nation, and Indian Territory. And there's a cropping of rock that's about 2 miles south of Stroud and about a half a mile or mile east down where Key West used to be. And you can go over there and see there's white big layers of rock. He said that's what they brought over and made the limestone that put the brick house together with. So that's what it was made with. Talk about the barns, what are their uses, what color. Oh, I got to tell you about the horse. We had a team that plowed the fields and then, but Daddy did buy a tractor when I was a pretty good sized kid when tractors came out. And Daddy was real good about, I guess he'd learned a lot of this agriculture stuff from his father. And anytime Stillwater had agriculture things and the county thing over at Chandler, he was good about doing all the updated farm stuff that Stillwater and the government had of things. And I had a stack of books about this high that the government gives you free of agriculture, how to take care of blackberries, how to do peaches, and how to do everything. Mama's middle sister, well, she went to school and graduated as a county home demonstration agent. And through her, we get all this literature. And I had a stack about this height burned up that I had upstairs in the brick house. I'd read every one of them. Landscape in your yard and roses and everything else. But Daddy then, he terraced it about the ditches. Then during this time, while he learned about terracing, to terrace a farm, and this farm is terraced now. And my husband, he came back here, he hated to drive his tractor up over them terraces and plow and stuff. He said, I'm going to plow them things down. I said, you better not. My daddy terraced them to keep the land from washing away, so you better leave them alone. So they're still out there. But I can remember when, it kind of makes me mad, because I don't act on the thoughts I get. My daddy, I can remember, I was little when this went on, and I can remember Mama said he didn't have enough money and he wanted to terrace his farm, and it cost $100 for that terracing equipment, that survey. And so he got George Ekenberg, he lived over here, the farm that joins this one. Joins up at where my brother is. He has just a half a mile down through here, and then this one's another. And so he had George Ekenberg to pay $50, and Daddy paid $50. And Mama didn't have any place to keep the survey equipment, so Miss Ekenberg had an attic upstairs, and she kept it all the time. And then when they sold it to, Bertha, whatever her name was, Raines, and her husband, and they traded houses, and then Miss Ekenberg went to town on her second husband she married. And then I thought, well, I need to go over there because I know she's got all that junk up there in that attic and get that surveying equipment. I just let it go. I didn't act on it. And her only son that's left, Johnny, my age, lives in Washington. He came back here and he got into the Washington with him. I don't know what good it'll do him out in Washington. Sell it, I guess. They procure, design, so I told about the barns and the farm renovations over the years. I told about the terracing and stuff. Mm-hmm. Daddy raised, he also built, he found out down at Payton, I believe, is where he learned about a man that raised sweet potatoes and sold them. And cotton and stuff was kind of going out then. And so he went into raising sweet potatoes. And my house is built over a basement here where was a sweet potato house. And you can see the cement out there, that side of the house, of the foundation. And it went down about 6 feet or more. And he had a stove in that end, a stove in this end. And then there was the top of the house, went up as high as a barn or a house. And then they made bins, corrals, that sections. And it was made out of 1x4s with an inch crack between it. So the sweet potatoes, when they went in there, were kiln dried. The fire dried the sweet potatoes out, and the air circulated between the boards. And he would do that in the fall. So he went down there and learned about sweet potatoes, and this farm would be planted with sweet potatoes. And by the way, he invented a planter one time to put these sweet potatoes out with. And similar to kind of off of a cotton planter type, I guess, but cotton planter, men didn't have to sit at the back. And Daddy fixed this where 2 men sat at the back, and one would put the sweet potato plant in, the other would put the next one in, the next one in, the next one in. And everybody talked about him inventing that, so he thought maybe he might could, sell it to somebody or something. So he wrote the company, and the company sent 2 men out, and Mama said, they'll steal it from you. So sure enough they did. He didn't get anything out of that. But anyway, that was a sweet potato planter that a team pulled the planter, and the 2 men sat behind it and put one row at a time of sweet potatoes out. And then we chopped them and all that junk. And he went down there and learned from that man how to do the sweet potatoes and how to plant them. And we had didn't raise cotton anymore, it was all sweet potatoes. And he built on this roadside going down. He took the bank on the south side, and he got oil field pipes, and he made about how long was them beds, Romeyn, 30 feet long, and about just wide enough that you could be on this side and this side, and you could reach across it and pull the slips out of sweet potatoes. And you saved your little bitty tiny long slim sweet potato, and you bedded them out in sand, and about 6 inches deep or something, and 3 or 4 inches of dirt on top. And he put that thing out there and kept water. We had a windmill, we pumped it full of water, and he irrigated those about 6 beds down through there, going from the house down the road toward the mailbox on the south side. And they would be about 40 feet or more long. And that was full of sweet potato little plants, seeds you put out, and then they'd put up a little shoot. When it was about 6 inches high, you pulled a slip off. And then we went back in the bottoms, back the backside, and got clay, and made a clay mud in a tub or something, and you mop that. We used to sell them 25 cents a hundred, and we got tired of counting the hundred, so we went to just measuring them with our hands and gave them all that. And you took those roots and you put mud on the bottom of them. Then you rolled them in sand so they wouldn't stick together. And you stacked them up in a bushel basket. And those are the plants you took then, and those men sat on there and held them baskets around and put them plants in the ground. And we sold them to lots of people came around and bought sweet potato plants from us, 25 cents a hundred. And those were still there till we came back to home. And my husband took the pipes out and used them for things, I don't know what. And he used the windmill to pump the water, and they put water in the house. At one time, when the oil fields came down here and they began to put wells around, they put some south of us, and several wells, I guess they're not there. I don't know if they're there now or not, but those trucks go that way. But Daddy would go down, and he also made gasoline and sold it. Had a pumper that, I guess it was quite a few wells around, because the pumper lived on the backside of Murphy's place, the west side. And he had a nephew in Virginia that came here and visited, and I dated him. I got a letter to marry him the day I accepted my husband's proposals. I never did tell him that because I didn't think he'd like it. But anyway, that man taught my daddy how to make gasoline out of the oil. And then the pipes had drips on them, and people go steal gasoline off the drips. Well, Daddy got permission to get all that gasoline and stuff, and that oil and mixture of stuff, and he refined it, and we sold gasoline 5 cents a gallon whenever I was going to high school. and people come up here. He put a filling station out there, and the cement base is still out of there of the building, and sold gasoline to everybody 5 cents a gallon. Can you imagine that? Now over $4 now. Ugh. But Daddy was a good manager. My husband used to say, "I wish I was smart as your daddy is to make a living like he did." He of course, his daddy died, and he's 9 years old, and he and his mother left. The other boys were grown and married and gone, and so Daddy told me one time, and I learned to eat squirrels, turtles, rabbits, fish, everything. And he said, of a morning I'd get up and take my gun, walk a mile east, kill squirrels, come back and have them for breakfast, put his trot lines in the creek and have fish for dinner. If he caught a turtle, he had that for supper. I learned how to clean a turtle too, as good as anybody, and skin a squirrel. People wouldn't eat a turtle now. My husband's mother came here one time, and Mama cooked turtle for dinner and chicken for dinner. And so they fooled her. They told her, she said, "I want some of that chicken down there. I don't want none of that turtle." They passed her the turtle, and she ate it, and she didn't know the difference. They teased her a long time about that. And then we used to have a lot of rabbits. You don't hardly see rabbits anymore. Can't hardly see one jump up when you go north from the highway.
And some of the original...
Whenever we chopped the cotton and the sweet potatoes and things, we just all the sharecroppers' kids around here, they'd be 3 or 4 kids in a family, and Mama would go out there and work chop cotton with us. When we came in for dinner too, it's talking about meals here and stuff. She would never let us go back to the field till we laid down and rested about 15 minutes. Because she said your food needs to rest in your stomach and give it a chance to digest and stuff. She wouldn't make us go. But Jim Murphy told me his daddy drove him like a horse. He said we couldn't even talk at the table, and the minute we got done eating, we had to go back to the field. But we were that kind of family, and Mama made us go in the front room and lay down and rest or whatever we wanted to do until about 15 or 20 minutes went by. And by then, I guess she had the kitchen done up enough. She went to field with us too, I guess, or went to the garden. But when we got done at night and shopping, came in to do the chores and things, she'd take all the kids and go to the creek, and we'd go down to that swimming hole and jump in the river and swim and get the dirt off of us and wash our hair. And in the summertime, you kept a tub of water out there, drawed it up from the well, and the sun warmed the water, and then when it got dark, you took your bath out there. And then, of course, boys better not peek, or you anyway, I'm sure they probably peek plenty. Boys do stuff like that. Girls probably don't care either, giggle and laugh too. But I loved that swim down there at the swimming hole. And my brother told me, he said that's the first place he kissed his wife. Before he died, he was sick, and the girls took him to the hospital, and the oldest girl said, "Daddy talked all the way to town about you and Mama when you was going together." And he said then, he told, I guess up there, said the first time he met her, they was evidently sharecropping down in there, and everybody gathered pecans, and Mama told me pecans sold for 1 cent a pound when she married Daddy, and they gathered pecans and sold them. Just imagine what you'd pay now for them. And they'd gather them pecans to take them to town and get 1 cent a pound for them. Well, this girl had gathered a flour sack full of pecans, and he seen her over there, and he went to talking to her, and he poured her pecans all out on the ground, and then they picked them up together. And then later, she went swimming in the creek there with us all swimming, and he said that's where he kissed her first time he's ever kissed her, was in the creek swimming. I don't remember where my husband kissed me at first. I didn't care much about it anyway. It didn't bother me. He was just somebody to go with. But I loved walking down that road going swimming in that swimming pool. Smell of the soil after a gentle autumn rain. Well, plenty of mud around here. We went barefooted all the time too, and I still go barefooted.
What'd you do with the bee sting?
Huh?
What would you do if you got bee stung?
Oh, it didn't worry me out. My daddy raised bees. He had lots of bees down here because they pollinated your fruit trees and everything. And but I didn't go around them enough to get stung. But Daddy gets stung and it didn't bother him. He said good for your arthritis and stuff, so he didn't worry about it. But bees didn't seem to bother him. He had a veil he put on, but never did put gloves or anything on. And so after we grew up and married and come back to the farm, Mama wanted me to have bees again, so she ordered me the set of bees and the queen and everything. And of course the hives was all still around here. So I had beehives, and I remember I had 2 out here in front. And by then my husband was spraying pecans. A man in Tulsa had worked at I forgot the name of that logging company in eastern Oklahoma that cut trees and sold lumber. And he had quit that and was retired, and he bought this farm across here. And then he had somebody take care of pecans. He lived in Tulsa, and so he'd come down and take care of pecans. So he finally hired my husband to work the field over there and spray pecans and things. And one morning he went out and sprayed those tassels, and my bees went out for nectar, and they all died. That was the end of my bees. I never even thought about it, or I'd have put a block of wood or a brick or something on their entrance and not let them out till noon or so. But this man that's bought my brother has just recently sold 70 acres of his farm, of the 80, to a man that was keeping cattle on there all the time. And our neighbor kid, the Hopkins, still have farms north of us, and he's dead. The son was 2 third generation now. And this man said he asked that boy if when he sprayed his clover, he's got clover on that corner, and he said, I spray before it blooms so it shouldn't kill his bees. But if he sprayed when it's in bloom, those bees are going to be dead. He brought out just the other day a bunch of hives and things and fixed his supers up down there for. He said he had some close to my fence up here too, clear down. He's got them scattered kind of in different places on the farm up there, 3 or 4 of them anyway. So he's raising, but I haven't raised bees since then. But I still got Daddy's beehives and things. He had them in town too. He raised bees in Stroud where they lived in town. And so after he died, I got all that junk out here in my trailer house. I'm going to sell it some of these days. One of the nurses at the doctor said, she said, call my cousin, and she gave me his name over about Arcadia, down that way somewhere. I called him, and he was going to come over, and he's going to call me, but he never did show up or something, so they're still out there. So I got them for sale some of these days, somebody. Going to bed on the farm, getting up. We always had pecans to eat at night and popcorn to pop, and we popped it in an ironwood heater stove in the front room at night, and Mama would always sweep the floor after everybody went to bed because she didn't want to walk on pecan hulls when she got up the next morning. But we had a popcorn popper, and we stuck it down in the lid of the wood heating stove, and popped that popcorn. We all sat around old straight back chairs, ate popcorn before we went to bed. And of course the popcorn is what we grew, wasn't bought. What crops and livestock did the farm produce then and now? Of course we don't have any crops now, it's all hay and cattle and stuff now.
A couple of more buildings that were on this place was right out here where this dairy barn is. There was an old clapboard building that her daddy and we too used as a coal oil shed and the fuel shed where we kept the oil and everything for the tractors and the lamps and whatnot. And then just west of that was a turkey house where they kept their turkeys and the chickens and stuff.
Turkeys? Yeah, Daddy raised turkeys at one time. He was always growing something. At one time he had sheep here, and then another time he raised turkeys, and we always had to shut those up at night because cows and things would catch them. And now they put wild turkeys back out here. This farm up close to that pyramid I told you about, we called it a pyramid when I was growing up, I don't know why, but they call it a monument now. Monument Road goes to Stroud, 66. And the man a half a mile north on that side has bought that land, and he planted wheat, and one day I came in from town, there was about 30 turkeys out there, wild turkeys. And when the men were building this house, they said they counted a whole bunch around here while they was putting the roof on it, and then coming up out here. And I came in one evening, and one was out here in the road, but I got a dog out here now, so the turkeys aren't coming up here. We still have one of the farm machineries out there to the pond that my daddy and them used, I guess. What is that thing, Romeyn? A cultivator? Or,
What's that?
Cotton planter or what?
Oh, well, we got a planter and a old mowing machine.
Still sitting out there. We had
We
when
got
I
a couple
was
of
kid.
sulky rakes.
Daddy always used 2 teams though, and one time he bought every once in a while you'd have to get a new horse or something, and one time he bought a big old pretty horse. That's the most beautiful thing you ever looked at, and I think it was a lot like these that pull what do you call them? I thought the other day.
Tumblebug or a
What?
dirt carryall.
No, a horse that's got them hair all around their feet and what do they call those?
Clydesdale.
Clydesdales.
Clydesdale.
Clydesdale, yeah, it was great big, and he only had the one, and I can remember that horse when Mama commented about it a lot. Every time he got through in the field, they brought him in and turned him loose and everything, he'd go out and get up high on the pond bank, south end of the pond bank that went around and held the water, and that pond, I should have had. At one time, our historical society gave a plaque for anything that was so many pieces over 50 years old, and I could count a dozen of them. That pond was one of them. And that horse would face the east, stand there every evening and face the east. I can still see him stand. I was going to paint it one time. I do paintings, and all my paintings burned up, except the ones I gave away. And I told you how Daddy took the groceries from the produce and peddled that at the market. Described the equipment then and now. Tractors, he bought a new tractor, and they had an old iron wheel when they first came out, you know. And then they got rubber tires on them later. And thrashing machine, I think my brother's got some pictures of him when he was a kid here and they thrashed the wheat and stuff. It wasn't wheat, I don't know what they thrashed. What did they thrash, Romeyn? I can't remember. Barley, maybe? He had a hay baler, and I can remember when Daddy grew some sorghum molasses one time here too, and it was between here and the road. On the north side of the highway, as you went down, they had a sorghum mill, and I was big enough that I can remember they had. But I never did figure out how them horses or donkeys or whatever they was, mules, went around and around. They went around and ground that thing and kept that sorghum going through the rollers. A wagon load of sorghum canes would come down, and the men would push that through the rollers, and the rollers squeezed the juice out, and the juice ran down into a pan, and the pan was a great long thing, long as this room is here, and about 6 feet wide, had little troughs in it, and the sorghum would boil at this end. When it went in, it boiled and went down that end, went through that crack, and came down this end of boiling, and went back and forth that way till it got to the end of the sorghum trough. And then it came out good sorghum already cooked, like it was supposed to be, like you buy in the store and eat. But I never could figure out how those horses or mules or donkeys, whatever it was, went around and around and around to grind that through that thing. And somebody told me later that they stepped over the tongue of the wagon or whatever it was.
Well, they didn't step over it, Mother. The pole that they were attached to was just long enough that it extended out over all that stuff.
I guess.
They walked around and around, and
Yeah, they
while
went
you were
around and
working
around.
on it, you had to remember to duck when the pole come around.
It was overhead then?
Yes.
I can't remember that. I just remember seeing them horses going around and around. I wondered why they went. I must have been
There
pretty
was a
big.
shaft in the center that came up that had a gear on it that ran everything, and them horses turned that shaft.
Yeah, and it rolled this rollers. There was 2 big rollers that squashed the juice out as the cane went through. There's big rollers, heavy metal, and they was kind of long, at least 3 or 4 feet long, maybe longer than that, I don't know. And the juice went down into that pan, and you kept a fire at the south end of that panel. There was a fire that kept sticking wood in to keep this panel cooking, the syrup cooking, and when it went from one end to the other, and there was sorghum. The juice when it went in up here, and sorghum when it came out down there. And they sold that in gallon buckets or something too.
Pretty good on biscuits.
Yeah, boy. I still buy sorghum and eat it. I like sorghum. This is a big tree that's still standing down here. Cottonwood, I guess it is. I don't know. But a little girl that lived down there, sharecropper, she must have been about 13 when she pulled that up out of the woods and brought it and put it. And she's dead and gone. Her kids are dead and her husband's dead and brothers and sisters are dead. So it's been a long time ago. The house is not there, and the house I lived in up in the field, it's had 2 sharecrop houses on it, and they're both gone. But there's a water well at each one of them still down in the ground, and that one up there had a cellar in it, but I imagine it's all caved in and gone now. And this man that lived down here, Daddy always let the sharecroppers have a garden and cows and chickens and everything, and he had hogs. And down this way, there, Daddy put at one time, Daddy had this bottoms full of alfalfa field, and then he built a dam down here on our section line between us and Johnny Mars. And that big dam, he put an opening in it that he could keep the water on these bottoms to water the alfalfa, and then when he wanted it let out, he'd open that gate and let the water go out. And that junk is still down there. But just on this side of it is where this man had his hogs in the bottoms down there. And Daddy fixed a water well and had an old pitcher pump, and it's still down there that he pumped water for those hogs and raised hogs so they was here. But the house is gone, but that tree's still standing. Describe the equipment then and now. Sharing with other families, describe the mechanical skills necessary then and now. Talk a little about hired help through the years. Well, we always had. And Mama sometimes could have help in her garden. Oh, we had an old man that came here. That's quite interesting. Those days you didn't have a Social Security number to track you with. And this old man, for some reason, I don't know why, Mama would question him a lot, but he never would tell anything. And you could get lost in them days. And he came from Nebraska. And when he got as far as here, he liked the meals Mama cooked and fed, and he worked on a farm, and he didn't ever want any money. All he wanted was a clean shirt and overalls in the spring and in the fall. That's all he asked for. And he lived with us till the old man got old and had to go. I had a baby girl then. And he got old and went to the Creek County Poor Farm, and that's where he died. But when he got old and knew someday he'd have to go somewhere because he didn't have anybody to take care of him, he didn't want Mama to. So he said he'd go to Lincoln County, had a poor farm over toward Edmond, somewhere between here and there, way over there. And he'd go stay there a while, and it was called Poor Farm those days, not a nursing home. And then he'd go to Creek County, which is only 2 miles over there, and a little bit further to the house. And he'd stay at least 2 weeks trying to decide which one treated him the best and which one took care of him the best, and that's where he was going to go. And he ended up going over to Creek County. I lived up here on the farm, and I had my second baby then, and he came up to tell me goodbye. And I had a little girl, and he held her on her lap, just like to kill me when Uncle Sid left. And I said, Mama, I'll take care of him. He don't have to go to nursing home. Mom said, Hortense, you can't do it. Said he's too old and he can't take care of himself or anything. Said you can't do it. And I wasn't well then either. I kind of had what do you call it in your lungs? Pneumonia type thing or something, because the doctor had me to strip off to my waist and sit out in the sunshine so long every day for during the ones.
He was the one that was the old self-made doctor, wasn't he?
Huh?
Wasn't he the one that was the self-made doctor?
Mama never could decide if that old man was a doctor or a lawyer. She said he's the smartest old man she ever seen in his life. And he came here with 2 footlockers full of books and things. And he had a doctor's book and a lawyer book because they all studied out of a big old thick book, 3 or 4 inches thick. And he had that thing full of books. And Mama said that's the smartest man she ever saw. But she did find out one time that he came from Nebraska and that he had been married at one time, but she never did know why he left or anything about him. And he came this far, and he liked living here, so he lived here from a young man till he died. I was real little when he came. I can't remember how old I was. We just always called him Uncle Sid, so I know. Name was Sib Hogarth. Mama did find out from him that he had a sister in Puget Sound out in Washington, where that is. And after Uncle Sib got old, she wrote to him, but didn't get no answer back, so I guess she's dead or something. So we never did. And I've been thinking a lot about sending to Nebraska a letter to the newspapers. I don't know the town's name. And let some newspapers print it. Because when I lived in Seminole, I had a neighbor when Romeyn was tiny. He was about 2 maybe. And it was when Wybert was born, Romeyn, because he ran off and went to Miss Taylor's house. And I got acquainted with her. We moved back to the same place we were when the first boy was born. The oil company had moved us to Masher back over there. And this old lady lived on another lease, and her name was Miss Taylor. And she'd always come over and play with my baby and everything. And then it was during the days when permanents were first being started, and you could buy a permanent in the store and give yourself one. And she bought one, and she'd come over and she'd have me to fix her hair and stuff. I could fix hair. So she wanted to pay me. It was 10 cents for them. But I said, I don't want no money for fixing your hair. And she wanted to do something so she'd iron my clothes. And so I would visit back and forth with her. So one day I asked her, where she's raised and where she's born, this, that, and other. She didn't know anything about any of her people. She didn't know nothing. She'd been married and had one daughter that lived on a lease close to her there, and she'd married and had a boy in service. Now, that's when it was, World War II, before that, because Robert was little, 42, 44 he was born. And she began to tell me one day about her family. And she said, I grew up in an orphanage. Said, my mother died when my 2 little baby sisters or something was born, 1 or 2 younger than her was born. But she had 2 brothers older than her. And I said, what was your name before you married? And she said, Jones. I said, oh, it would be Jones Smith or Black or something. You can be able to trace it. And then I remembered that the radios had begun to tell people would write to the town, they'd find people, and the radio would announce it. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll just write to Miami, Oklahoma, Veneta. There was an orphanage, and that was back in the days when orphanages wasn't orphanages. And the old man that run that orphanage, she said, put the kids when they get 16 or 18, and he'd hire them out to the farmers and the people around there. And she said he took my 2 brothers and put them on the railroad track and told them to stay on that railroad track walking from Tulsa or Veneta up in there till they got to Wewoka, and they'd find their daddy at Wewoka. And I know now that Rupert Jones that we got acquainted with in the oil field would be that boy's, her brother, their daddy. Because Rupert Jones and his daddy run a store in Wewoka. And I know good and well that would have been that old lady's brother. But then I didn't connect it. I guess, I don't know if I got acquainted with him then or not, but we lived on oil. But I didn't think about it till after I came back here, and I've been thinking about it. So I wrote a letter to the newspaper at Veneta, I guess, and I told them her story. And she had a sister still living there that married and was still living in Veneta. And so what I sent it to was a police department to put in the paper, and so the police took it out to her sister's house and gave it to her, so they wrote her a letter. And she said, oh, my sister wants me to come see me. She said, I don't know if I can. She was an old woman then. She said, I don't know if I can go or not. I said, yeah, we'll just put you on a bus and put a tag on the front of your shirt with your name and address and where you're going. You won't get lost. And you tell the bus driver, and he'll take you right up there. So she did. She went up there, and she said that the whole family, her sister and all the kids and grandkids and everything, she was so thrilled. She came back. I said, that's the best thing I ever did in my life, I think, was to find that woman's family for her. I sure loved that old lady. She's real sweet.
Make a good detective.
Yeah, but I'd heard it on radios then. TVs wasn't invented yet, And I'd heard kind of stories like that, and I said, Miss Taylor, we can find your family. And I asked her a lot of questions, and I said, now, I'll write the letter, but you got to sign it. I'm not going to sign your name. So she signed her own name at the letter, but she didn't know what to write. But that poor old soul, she wanted to pay me for doing her hair, and I said, well, if you insist on it, you can iron my boys. They wore striped overalls for Sunday to go to church, And shirts that I made, I could buy 5 yards of material and make 3 shirts out of it. And I could lay the pattern around in different areas and get my husband and both the boys a shirt. And they wore shirts and striped overalls to church and blue ones every day to school. And I said, well, and I always ironed their overalls. And I said, well, you can iron the boys' overalls for them if you want to. So she'd do that to help pay for her hair.
Speaking of shirts, we used to get cement and chicken feed, and the cement came in a heavy woven, almost like burlap, but it wasn't. It was white. And the chicken feed, of course, you could get in all kinds of printed color sacks. And she'd take them and rip them open, and we had shirts of all different colors and designs, and she made Daddy work shirts out of the cement sacks.
That was after we moved back here to the farm, and we bought, the feed stores began, the companies began to put printed sacks, 100 pounds of feed in it, and it would take 4 of them to make. When he went to college, he took that to college for his bedspread, a sheet that I'd made. And he always made up his bed real nice when he's in college, and he said his house mother said he's the only one took care of his room like he's supposed to. But a sheet could be like a bedspread, a pretty piece of print, looked all right, so he just used that, and that's what I sent to college with him. But when my house burned, I had a whole stack of those feed sacks upstairs for quilts to make, a whole bunch burned up. I should have got them out and sold them because everybody was wanting them then. Didn't make them anymore. Companies didn't make them anymore. But I got tickled at my husband when he always wore a long sleeve shirt, but he'd roll it up. I said, why don't you buy them short sleeve shirts that Evans and Stroud got on sale? I like a long sleeve shirt. I said, but you wear it rolled up all the time. So Evans lumber furniture clothing store, and they had a lumber company too in Stroud, and a men's clothing store. Evans did, and I said they got them shirts on sale. It was real cheap. I don't remember, wasn't maybe 15 cents a piece. I don't remember. It was back during the Depression. I went up there and bought 5 or 6 of them. I said, you can wear these to work at the Allied, the same as the long sleeve shirt you wear it rolled up anytime. So he started wearing them, and then every man up there started wearing short sleeve shirts. Men wouldn't wear them to begin with. Hired help, we did that too during the winter months. What was it? Oh, in the winter months we had the pecans and popcorn and stuff we ate. And we always, Mama, we had country schools. Well, I told you about the pie suppers. We had to make candy for the kids. And then somebody had to be a Santa Claus. And my mama was big, heavy hipped, but she wasn't very big at the top. We all have large hips and thighs. But she'd dress up and be Santa Claus for our school. And one year she made every kid in school, the boys, a baseball. She ripped up a baseball and took that leather and made a pattern, and she made every kid wrapped up. Then you had every package at the store was wrapped with twine. And I've got a twine holder right up there, that a ball of twine went in the grocery store. Some sat on the desk, and I found that after the fire burned. And screwed down to the desk, and they put a ball of twine in it, and some hung from the ceiling. And they wrapped up all your meat and everything you bought, and everything in the dry goods store was wrapped with twine. Mama saved all that twine, made a ball for every kid and every boy in school, and covered it with tongues out of leather shoes then. Men's high-top shoes had leather tongues, and she'd save them and cover them with leather. And then she made every girl a doll for Christmas one year. And then she'd be Santa Claus coming there. And then we had a Christmas tree and little old candles that might catch the tree on fire, set up there and stuff. Had to be real careful. And then we'd put on a play. Division of household chores, which says supposed to be chores, I guess. But we always had to carry in the wood and the water at night. That was one chore you had to have to do. My sister and I usually carried in some wood, and my brother carried in the buckets of water. Home remedies. We didn't have remedies, but I can remember, and everybody done their own remedy. Mama greased everybody, and I remember when I was here on the farm, there was a girl over there across the road had a baby, and Bubba said, you might as well come and go with me to deliver that baby, because you may have to someday be like a midwife, you know. And she would go all around the neighborhood and do all that kind of stuff. And I remember going over there one time with her when I lived up here on the farm during the Depression years. And the home remedies, Mama would buy, then you bought stuff in a bottle with a cork in the top of it. And if you didn't wash out your bottle and take it back to the drugstore, you couldn't have a refill. You had to save that glass bottle. So I saved bottles, Mama saved bottles, I still save bottles, junk I don't need. Some sitting up there on top of the cabinet. But I remembered Mama, and I was sick when he was born. I was sick about 3 months, and they never did know what was wrong with me. Mama thought I had scarlet fever or something. I was sick so long. And I had milk leg and all that junk with him too. I had to wear my left leg bandaged for years after, and had to wear a certain old shoe, one grandma's shoe with a shoestring to tie up to walk with, because my leg was swelled so bad. And I laid in that bed I told you her daddy gave her for a wedding present in 1907. And after he was born, for some reason I took this sickness, either fever or something, and I did not remember anything. I laid there for, I think, about 3 months before I knew to take care of him. And Mama asked the doctor. Then we had young doctors, old doctors had all died, and the only doctors we had was new doctors that was going to little towns to internship or something. Then they'd go on to a bigger town to make money. And this doctor lived in Stroud, had a business there, and he came out to take care of me. And I can remember one time, well, he put me on buttermilk. Mama would churn the butter, and she brought me a glass of buttermilk with butter floating in it. I can remember seeing that. And then I remember one time he brought and your pills were put in little pasteboard boxes, little box about 2.5 inches long, about 1 inch square. And that box was so full of capsules of pills that they couldn't even put the lid down on it. Gosh, that's when I kind of, I guess, began to become two. But they never did. And Mama had bought a new cotton mattress. They were only about 4 inches thick then. And she had bought a new cotton mattress and had it on that bed that I was laying on whenever, I guess when he was born. And she moved it over in this corner of the house after he was born. It was in that corner. And then we had also the rural telephone, and the only telephone was out of Davenport. Stroud didn't have any out here. And it came as far as our house. It didn't go any further south. And everybody came up to house and turn the crank on the telephone to ring. And I finally gave that to my great-granddaughter when she got married, the telephone. I still had it. And the mom, this new mattress, I can remember sweating. I guess I just sweat terrible, but I don't remember sweating, but I remember freezing to death. And I'd have her bring me a towel, and I'd wrap it around my neck, and then put it all around me, and it'd just be wringing wet. She'd change it, and I'd get cold when it got wet, and she'd bring another one. And Mama said when I got better, after 3 or 4 or 5 weeks went by or something, because I was about 3 months old when I took him and went back home to live. And she said, you sit up in a chair and I'll turn the mattress over and everything and make up your bed and making it feel better, you know. She turned that mattress over and it was mildewed on the bottom. That's how much I sweat. She couldn't believe it. She said if I'd have known that, I'd have bought a tablecloth and put under the sheets so I wouldn't have ruined them. But that ruined that cotton mattress. It was all cotton in those days. We used to make our own cotton mattresses too. The home demonstration ladies, and I was living at Seminole then, had just gone back to work, I guess. And the county agents, the government furnished the bale of cotton, and the farm women, the home demonstration women, they met in each other's homes once a month and had dinner, and they quilted for each other, or had the lesson in the afternoon, ate dinner, everybody brought something. And they made these cotton mattresses. The government furnished, I guess during the Roosevelt time or something, furnished a bale of cotton, and the women took that cotton and patted it out and made it and beat it out with a stick or something. And Mama gave me the needle. It's about that long that they sewed through that cotton with the twine, and you put a tuft of cotton under the top part where you sewed it back down.
Well, they gave you a cotton tick to put it in.
Yeah, it was a tick, because Mama gave me a tick that was sewed up one time. I remember that. And it was striped, blue and white striped ticking. The government furnished all that for the country farm women. And they made their own mattresses during that time. And that needle burned up over there in the fire. I remember that. But that's part of the home demonstration they did teaching lessons.
Tanya, 15.
Mama's sister ended up down at Wagner County. Saturday afternoons and nights. Saturday afternoon, Daddy loved his homemade ice cream. Every summer, we invited everybody in the neighborhood, and they came to our house, and we sat out the back door and take a gunny sack and put 100 pounds of ice in it, and take a sledgehammer and beat the ice up, and then dip it up and put it in a freezer. And Mama learned to make ice cream out of. She cooked eggs and cornstarch and made a custard-like thing, and put pure cow's milk and pure cream in it. And oh, that was the richest, best ice cream you ever ate. That was really good. And all the sharecroppers and neighbors and kids and everybody came, and we'd have that on Saturday nights. So Daddy loved to do that. He'd go to town by that 100 pounds. Stroud had an ice plant then. And I've been trying to get somebody to put an antique shop in it. It's still standing. I said, that would make the best antique shop. And it was next door to the depot, and that's one block south of Main Street in Stroud, which would be 2nd Street. And Stroud's 3rd Street. And that building is a cement building that they made the ice in, and the dock's still there, and then a room part on this end. And Evans, they said, Richard Evans had bought it, and he walked. Men would come down and have coffee every morning at the cafe, and he walked across the street, and a car hit him, and he died. So I drove by there the other day, and they're still sitting there. I wish somebody would come in and put an antique shop in there. That'd be the best place for history and everything there. Ooh, I'd love to see that. Got 2 or 3 on Main Street, but that one sits down there. And it's got a brick sidewalk. The street is brick that goes down to that, because that was the depot in the main part of town. And a big hotel was on this east corner, and the depot was on the south side next to the railroad track. Ice House was just east of it. And when I lived here on the farm, I didn't have any furniture. Bed, probably a rocking chair, all I had in the front room. And I had a day bed that you folded up, the top came up, and the front went down, and in the daytime it was a day bed. At night you let them down and raised that up, and that was your bed you slept on. My aunt gave me that when I got married. And that was our only furniture I had in the front room. Well, my husband and my daddy, we had a car, and Daddy didn't have one then. And so they would go to town on Saturday, and the roads was real muddy, and they go up to went the old 66 highway. And when they got in town, there was a lot of people down at the depot area, and Daddy said, let's go down here and see what's going on. So they did, and they were selling everything out of that depot, hotel. The people had moved to California or somewhere, and they was just sitting there, and they came back and sold the building and all this stuff out. And what you did, my husband said, was you went in and whatever you wanted, you pulled it out, brought it out on the front porch and auctioned it off. My husband got that dresser for 50 cents. I didn't have a dresser. And it burned up over there in that house too. That was the prettiest dresser. Ooh, it had a great big mirror, bigger than that TV on it. It was a bigger dresser than that. And then I guess it was solid walnut. It was a beautiful thing. This plain modern, as modern as it could be. Now I watch the antique show, and I kind of wonder what it would have been worth. But that's the way they were auctioning off. The auctioneer, you go out what you wanted and pull it out, and they county extension workers. And I still went to the county extension in Chandler and got literature and did things here on the farm when I moved back here too. Sundays on the farm, I guess we didn't ever go to town to church or anything, but every once in a while. Oh, I grew up when the country school, all the churches in town would come out to try to save everybody in the country, I guess, and they'd hold 2-week revival meeting. And we'd go to the woods and cut poles and put poles out, and then they'd put poles across the top and then cut the brush and put it over the top. You had a brush arbor. And then Daddy would go to the lumber company, and they'd volunteer and give you 2x12s to set for seats, and they'd cut stumps and put them down for the seats and put these boards on them. Of course, that was advertising the company, lumber company, pretty good. And then you took the lumber back whenever the church was in. And every 2 weeks all summer, we'd have every denomination you could think of come to church down here. So it don't matter to me what church I belong to. I listened to all of them when I was growing up. We had a lot of what they called holy rollers then. And everybody's shouting, singing, dancing, falling on the floor, and all that junk went on. Gosh. And that's the kind of church. And we didn't go to town because you had to drive. It was 7 miles going around each section line like that, and getting a wagon and everything go. We just didn't do that. As the area around the farm changed, there was just cattle and hay now. And then pecans. My husband, there's a lot of pecan trees on this, and this orchard right here, he set out when I was little, put little trees out there, and they're big trees now, and that's orchard. And my daddy put that one on the corner up there as y'all go back out at my brother's part, and he set that orchard out, I don't remember when, but Mama's brother said, Grover, you'll never live long enough to see these pecan produce. But he did. He lived to be 91, and that pecan grove had produced for several years. How often do you shop? I don't go shopping. Now I have a little helper that does my shopping for me.
Well, you've covered just about everything on there. We probably need to.
For the next 100 years. It's going to go down to the 4th generation now, so, or 5th maybe, I don't know. So he owns it now, and I just stay here. I said, that's my house. I'm going out there and live till I die. So I'm here. I did not fill out this front page, but I guess I could give it to you anytime or something.
This has been great. We appreciate hearing your stories.
I've been intending to write all this. After 2 or 3 weeks ago, I heard that from Tulsa Times on Channel 13. I thought, Lord, I got so much history about this Indian junk and everything, I could write a book. And I thought, I need to write that and let them know, because it's mostly Indian that they're doing now. Reflections or something, I believe they're calling it, on Channel 13. And I was glad to hear y'all was coming to do this, because that saved me writing it down. But when I got this outline, I thought, boy, I can write a whole book on this. I started reading it, and I got through about half of this, and then I don't know what's on the next page. I didn't read it. See, I didn't even get a third of the way through this. I spent Mother Day at his house. And oh, by the way, I told you I got the oldest Mother's Day present at church, didn't I? I had for about the last 4 or 5 years all those little statues up there and things, and the other one's still in the car out there. And they gave me a $25 gift certificate at Walmart this year. But all those baskets up there have been Mother's Day baskets with flowers and things in them, different things that they... And I've been getting it. And they give the youngest mother and the oldest mother. Hortense, come on down here. They don't even ask how ages anymore. The preacher's got to know. Oh, she's kind of cute. He said this year, he said, how old are you, Hortense? I said, I'm not going to tell you. He said, you're 96. He knew this exactly how old. 2 more months, I'll be 97.
You're doing great.
Yeah, I'm kind of proud of myself. I'm still driving my car, and I'm going up. I told my son they all want me to quit driving. I said, as long as I know the right side from the left side of that road, I'm going to drive that car as long as it's running.
And
that's a 1984.
And what a stop sign is.
Yeah, no stop signs at all. Oh, yeah, somebody told him that I did not. He came out here and told me, he said, Mama, you're going to have to be careful what you're doing. I don't know who told him. He wouldn't tell me. But they said I ran a stop sign in Stroud, and when I got under it, I ran off the road. I said, that's a darn lie. I never did run a stop sign in my life. And then later, the next week, somebody told me about somebody, and then they said, I saw you in town last week. I said, I was not in town. So there is another car that looks as bad as mine does. And I don't know who they are. I have no idea. But I go quick. My neighbor 1 mile over here died. She belonged to Methodist Church in Stroud. And nobody quilts anymore. Old people don't want quilts. Young ones all have a job. And they don't know how. Haven't learned. And I thought, I can go take that lady's place. I'd already visited on, they did do it twice a week, Fridays and Tuesdays. And Tuesday, that church cooks meals for the Lions Club. And on Friday, we took our lunch. And if you came on Tuesday, you got to eat with them, whatever was left over. And so I said, that woman died, and she belonged to that church, and she went there and quilted, and I had met her. And then 5 or 6 maybe was doing it then, where they used to have 12 or 13. And so I went up and took her place, and I've been going, I think, 3 years now. And then we've had another one die, and another one that got blind and had to go to nursing home, and another one that fell downstairs and broke her shoulder, and then a nursing home. She was 104, just died a little while ago. And there's only 2 or 3 coming now to quilt, counting me. And when my brother got sick, I told my nieces, I said, I'll go up and stay with your mother while you're taking care of your daddy. So I called them and I said, I don't know when I'll be back. My brother's got cancer and I'm going to be taking care of them, and I don't know when I'll come back. But I stayed 2 weeks and I got sinus infection and this whole side of my head. She had a pecan tree and a cedar tree right at the front door, and I don't know if that's what.
That old cedar will do it to you.
Yeah, and tree pollen's what's been high right now.